because we've got a lot to cover today.
No, there's something with the, I think that's my mistake, so just to connect back to the
And everybody, if you're listening to me, raise your hand. If you're listening to me, raise your hand, please. All right. If you feel compelled to talk, cover your mouth. So, I want to welcome everybody to this month's Jids program, Voices from Israel, Palestine. We're very excited to host these wonderful educators and dialoguers in the region who I think will be able to talk freely with us, not only about their work, but also the region. We're going to start with some, their talks, and then Q&A, which will be moderated by my friend Imad. He's a great voice on this topic, and he's actually very stupid, even though he's a Harvard-trained astrophysicist. But as Harvard-trained astrophysicists go, he just doesn't know anything. But so, if you're new to Jids, one thing I need to explain to you is we have Trump voters and BDS supporters here. So this is not like a, left of center only, right of center only. We ask for you to be civil at all times, especially during the small groups. So if anybody is inclined to be righteously indignant when they hear something they don't like, remember, there is no such thing in dialogue as righteously indignant. It's self-righteously indignant. Okay, remember that. Also, if you feel compelled to say you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts, you can say that on Bradley Boulevard, alone. Here, we try to be respectful and loving, if possible, regardless of whether you agree with what the last person said. So hopefully you will fill out, your feedback questions before you leave. You can email them to me. The address is there. If you don't want to do it today, if you want to do it today, you can do it anonymously. And with that, I think we're good, and I will turn it over to Iman.
Just before we're starting, I just want to ask.
The mic is not on.
I just want to ask, or just mention that I asked Jane to take some photos for us, for our documentation. So if anyone has a problem with that, it's not going to be profile close-up, but just to get an atmosphere. So if you have a problem with that, please let Jane know, so she would make sure that you're not in our photos. Yeah, sorry.
Assalamu alaikum, shalom alaikum, peace be upon you. Welcome everyone to this event. We're here to hear voices from Palestine and Israel, and we are going to, as Dan indicated, have a frank discussion. But frank does not mean impolite or disrespectful. It certainly doesn't mean
You need to hold it right up to your mouth.
all right. Can you hear me now? All right. So we're going to have a frank but respectful conversation on facts on the ground and how to make a difference. I'm going to introduce each speaker separately, and they will have 15 minutes to make a presentation each, and then we'll spend about 40 minutes on open questions, and then we'll go to smaller groups. I will let somebody else explain the organization of smaller groups. Hannah Benkovsky has an MA in Comparative Religion from Hebrew University and 3 decades of practical experience in interfaith activities in Israel and abroad. She serves now as the program director of the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, which is part of the Rossin Center for Education and Dialogue. In that capacity, Hannah coordinates and teaches in the center's various educational programs, produces educational materials, and performs consulting and advocacy work. As an educator, she has taught in a variety of venues, including colleges, Christian seminaries, IDF, and government offices. Finally, in addition to her other work, Hannah is a professional freelance tour educator in Jerusalem.
Thank you. Maybe, I think we're going to do the introduction together. We're going to go jump from one speaker to the other. So maybe you can introduce John.
Absolutely.
And we'll explain the setting a little bit.
Okay. Born and raised in Jerusalem, John Meyer is the Rossing Center's Director for International Engagement. He has been involved in peace building and dialogue initiatives from a young age. He continued to pursue relevant subjects in university, completing an MSc in International Relations of the Middle East from the University of Edinburgh, an MA in Theology and Religious Studies from Vrije University in Amsterdam, and a BA in Religion and Politics and Society from King's College London. John also researches, writes, and lectures on Palestinian Christian identity, Palestinian theology, and interreligious dialogue.
So thank you very much for the introduction. I'll just explain the setting because we want to make it interactive, so not just long speeches. John and I will introduce our work, the concept of the methodology that we're working with, a bit about our experiences, and then after we'll have Q&A. We will do the exercise in small groups. It's not a discussion group that you're going to discuss what we've taught. You're going to exercise the methodology that we work with in our project as a Rossing Center. So it's going to be something very different than any other discussion group you were involved with. But you'll have to be patient because first we're going to have the introduction and the Q&A. But you will have to work. I mean, you're not going to be able to sit and listen to others. So that will, I hope, will involve everyone. The tables are arranged for 8 people, so we will have groups of 4. So look around. If you just have 6 in a group, you will have to find 2 others. We'll have to change the setting a bit because we will need a group of 4. But let's wait with that for another half an hour. Do we have the slides working? Okay. Okay. So first, we want to introduce ourselves, and it's not going to be just a biography. I want to share with you my experience because this tour that we do around the US is actually discussing the possibilities for dialogue post October 7th and during the war in Gaza with the ceasefire. I really hope that it's the beginning of the end, at least of the war, but we don't see that yet. But one of the things we realized is that dialogue was impacted by what's happening in the Holy Land, in Israel, Palestine, everywhere. In many places, we hear that groups that used to work together stopped working. People felt uncomfortable to talk to each other. And we're going to try to present you how we actually managed to work together post October 7th, or really after October 7th. And I want to start with my very personal experience, so it will give you an idea of how we work. On the 7th of October, 8th of October, we still were running up and down to the shelter, so I wasn't really thinking. But right after that, I felt paralyzed. I felt I couldn't do anything. I'm working in the field of interfaith peace building for the last 30 years. It started as interfaith and became more and more peace building. I work at the Rossing Center for 20 years. It's a center where we have Israelis and Palestinians, Jewish, Christian, Muslim working together. We've been through many crises, but this time it's something totally different. And for a month I couldn't do anything. After a month, one of our colleagues, who's Italian, she said, come with me to Italy for a week, just to clear your mind and start thinking normally. So I went with her and I came back and thought, how do we continue? What do we do? Not only with the program, because obviously you have to adjust the program, but with myself, how do I get myself together to continue working toward peace when there's a horrible situation a few tens of kilometers away. And it took us a while in the center, in the Rossing Center, to realize that what we actually need to do is to implement the methodology that we use for the participants of our programs on us. Because you know how it is, when you're running a program, so you know how to activate it, but you don't know what it means to participate in that. And we said, it's our time to do that. And one of our methodologies is trauma-informed methodology. It's a methodology that's based on spiritual counseling that says that actually we all traumatized. Nothing new about that. We all traumatized by what's happening in Israel, Palestine, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, what's happening in Jerusalem. I think it took me about a year to understand how isolated and blinded I was, to realize how traumatized it was for you guys here in the US, if you're Jews, if you're a Christian or Muslim who participate in dialogue, because suddenly it's so hard to talk. A lot of Jews felt that they were left alone and no one called to ask how they're doing after October 7th, and they expected people to ask how they're doing. A lot of Christians said we just didn't know what to say. A lot of relationships were broken after that. So the trauma goes beyond the people who are in the first circle to be traumatized. Obviously, we're traumatized out in Jerusalem, which is quite safe, quiet, but you know, the fact that we watch the news, the fact that we're exposed to what's happening in Gaza, the fact that we're exposed to what's happening in the Gaza envelope on the 7th of October, it's all traumatizing us. But our methodology says that everyone experienced this trauma in a different way based on their personal experience. So my trauma would be different than your trauma. And the methodology that we're also going to exercise with you today is to try to understand ourselves better through connecting different experiences in life with the way we experience the current trauma regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that's what we did. We sat together in this special setting, all the staff. Usually what we're going to do today is an exercise of 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so, but we spent 2 days, as usually we do it. And each of us had to share their trauma, their moral dilemma that related to the situation in the war, and we started to discuss it. And it gave us a lot of strength to be able to work together. It creates a certain openness and empathy among the participants that allows you to work better together. So even if we do not agree, and believe me, we're 18 people, there are lots of disagreement between us, but we know that we have a common goal, that all of us wants to get to a peaceful, just, equal society, and we can work toward that together. And I would share with you quickly what I said in that meeting. I think my moral dilemma, right after everything started, and everything, I mean, the 7th of October, what happened to the Jewish communities around the Gaza envelope, and then the war is continuing in Gaza and still continuing in Gaza, and then it's also developed to the West Bank now. The first feeling was guilt, but I tried to work not to stick to guilt, but because it's not useful, but to responsibility. And my moral dilemma was, what is my responsibility to what's happening? In 3 different levels. First, my responsibility to what happened to the Palestinians in Gaza, that suffer destruction, that suffer death, that suffer pain. You've seen the photos, you've seen the images. I have to admit, in Israel, we don't get to see, the media doesn't share the information enough, the Israeli media, but if you make the effort, you can find it in the social media, in certain newspaper. What is my responsibility for what's happening there? The other level is my responsibility for Israel and for Israelis. Because when I've seen what Israelis were doing, soldiers, politicians, civilians, I'm devastated. What is my responsibility? How come that my brothers and sisters do things like that? How come 76%, and this is the latest poll in Israel, 76% of Israeli Jews says that there are no innocent people in Gaza? How am I responsible for the fact that we educate people to think that there are no innocent people in Gaza? What is my responsibility? And then what is my responsibility toward Jewish communities around the world? That because of what's happening in Israel, they have to suffer from a feeling of insecurity, they feel insecure, there's a rise of anti-Semitism. As I said, for Jews and Christian and Muslim who are in dialogue, and now their dialogue that they built for so many years is targeted, is harmed, and is challenged. What is my responsibility for the rest of the community around the world? And with that responsibility, I said responsibility, not guilt, because responsibility is something that you can work with. And what I'm trying to do, or what I started to try to do as part of our work at the Rossing Center, is to see what can I do in order to help to repair, in order to build a different future. I have my son in the other room playing with his computer. I have to think about him. How do I want to see his future in the Holy Land, in Israel, Palestine? So that's what kind of urged me to continue after working in the Rossing Center for 20 years. I needed something, the motivation to continue working, and that's what helps me to continue. That's what helps me to stay and work for a better reality for people in the Holy Land.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for everyone who's turned out, and also for the church for hosting us, and also for Dad who did a lot of work to make this happen. So a big thank you. Are you with us or are you with them? This is the question my Israeli Jewish classmate asked me when I was 12 years old. Are you with us or are you with them? You see, I'm a Palestinian Christian from Jerusalem who grew up in an Israeli Jewish school. So I'm probably a Palestinian Christian who built the most chalukiyot. For those who don't know what this is the Hanukkah, the menorahs of Hanukkah. And I also had the privilege of speaking to numerous Holocaust survivors that would come to the school to tell us about their testimony. But it was after history class when my classmate asked me, are you with us or are you with them? You see, the teacher was talking about 1948 and the war. But for us Palestinians, we call it the Nakba. So I had to sort of raise my voice, get the courage to raise my voice, and say and challenge the teacher on the narrative she was teaching. But that's when my friend Amitai turned to me after class and he asked, are you with us or are you with them? He was asking me to essentially put my allegiance in one group or another, or perhaps be selective in my compassion. And this really troubled me, and I remember going back home and not knowing what to answer, and I didn't know what to answer. So I went to my parents, and my dad, after work, he sits in the exact same spot on the couch. There's actually like a spoke there. And I told him what happened at school, and I was like, what was I supposed to say? So he kind of looked at me with his glasses just below, because he likes to read all the time, and he said, what are you going to do about it? And I said, no, what was I supposed to answer? Right? I need a quick answer here. And again, his glasses, what are you going to do about it? So he was basically challenging me. I had to go on a long journey of reading, discovering, asking questions to understand where or how I was supposed to really answer my friend every time. And I realized that I didn't have to be selective in my compassion and my commitment to peace for the two groups living. And that's when I decided to study subjects in university that related to the conflict. And on my way to university, for those who have been back home, you know that when you are in the shuttle bus to the airport, that there's a security before you enter. And I jumped in the shuttle bus, and basically security guards came on and they took everyone's IDs. Right? Again, for those of you who have done this, you know what I'm talking about. And after 5 minutes, they gave it to every single person their ID, except for me. You see, I was the only Palestinian on the shuttle bus. And the security guard asked me to get off the shuttle bus. And I did. And he started asking me questions. But he was so confused of who I was. I'm a Palestinian Christian from Jerusalem who speaks fluently Hebrew without a Palestinian accent. He thought I was laughing at him when I was answering the questions. And he started to get pretty sort of annoyed and angry with me. And he took his gun and he placed it in a very threatening way and asked me to go into a room where another 2 security guards did a body search. I was furious. I was angry. But I wasn't as angry at the security guard as a person because he reminded me of Amitai. He would have been Amitai's age. But I was furious at the systems that have placed me in my position and him in his position and continue to enforce oppression on groups of people. And I remember again calling my parents after in the airport and telling them about the experience, and their answer was the same one. What are you going to do about it? And this is where I've committed to both this peace and reconciliation work, but also the work for justice and challenging these systems of oppression. And I have found to do this type of work at the Rossum Center. Because the Rossum Center, essentially, if you want to know what we do, we believe that if we teach justice and peace as seriously as we teach math, in schools and universities we'll see a completely different reality. Which is kind of a funny saying because we don't really teach math too well in Israel and Palestine. And we do it in 3 different ways. The first one is we try to transform educational institutions. So we work with schools and universities. We have a program that works first with the principals, then their teachers, and then the students themselves, trying to get this type of education within their curriculum. Because as you know, the school system isn't exactly helping us. The second thing that we do, which you will have a taster of, is the healing hatred methodology. It's a trauma-informed methodology for engaging with one another. A lot of our understandings and behavior of the conflict are motivated by our trauma. And of course, we are the ones living there, but I'm sure you are traumatized enough from the footage you've seen on your phone. And the third thing that we do is we specialize in the intersection of the conflict and religion. As you know, we are deeply religious communities, even for those who might live more of a secular life. I always joke that sometimes speaking to my Muslim and Christian friends, I ask them, we talk about life and ask them if they believe in God, and they say, some of them say no, so I say, oh, so you're an atheist, and they say, God forbid, don't call me an atheist. Because we're deeply religious in our identities and how we build our communities, so on and so forth. And this allows us to do work together where we're trying to basically transform around 70 educational institutions every single year. Now, I think the majority of us don't want to continue seeing either the horrors of October 7 or the horrors of the genocide in Gaza. I think we all need to come together to try and stop both the systems of oppression, but also build and foster reconciliation between the communities so we can transform the whole dynamic. So my challenge, I guess, for us all is just as my parents challenged me is, what are we going to do about it? Thank you.
The methodology that we use that healing hatred is called healing hatred because trauma causes hate. We see that very clearly in our societies. People who are traumatized tend to express that with hate, and there's not enough concern and care for the trauma that we carry after experiencing very harsh things. And the idea of the methodology is maybe to focus on that and to allow us to talk about this trauma and to dismantle this hatred so we would be able to have a more compassionate conversation among ourselves. So maybe we'll open the floor now for a bit of Q&A before we explain how the methodology works and exercise it. So we invite questions.
Before we take any questions from the audience, I wanted to ask my own question. with the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society, which invited a Jew and a Christian to come and speak and have a dialogue here. So,
I would say that it's a coincidence that John and I are here. We have in the staff, of course, Jews, Christian, Muslim, and in all our program, well, no, I would say maybe I do something different, but we include Jews, Christian, Muslim, Druze, and other religions as well. As you can see in the slides, there are more slides that show the work of the center. Actually, most of the program we have more Muslim students than, especially in university, for example, than Christian. The reason why we both came here and we talk about Jewish Christian is because we came to talk because here Christians are the majority, and I think most of the challenges in the interfaith world in the last 2 years in the US is it's a dialogue between Jews and Christians here, and that's something that we also wanted to tackle in our session. And also one of the uniqueness of the center is the work that I do with my colleagues, and that's related to Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land. There are many organizations who work on Jewish-Muslim dialogue, on the interfaith dialogue, and they focus on the Muslim community. But with the Christian, we are the only one who focus on Jewish-Christian dialogue in the context of the Holy Land. That means that there are many organizations who do Jewish-Christian dialogue around the world, but Jews are the minority and Christians the majority. And we are expert in being minority. We know how to do that. But we still struggle in being majority. And in the Holy Land, we are the majority. And the Christians, there are different Christians than in the dialogue around the world, because the Christians in the Holy Land are indigenous Christians, Palestinian Christians, who are always minority, at least since the 7th century, who have different experiences, and there are special and unique challenges of Jewish-Christian relations that you don't have in other places. One of the questions is, who is the minority and who is the majority? What is the power dynamics? Usually you have a weaker side and a stronger side, and in the Holy Land, in Israel, it's not clear who is who, because Israelis think that we are still a very small minority in the Middle East, and a small minority in the Christian world, and all the world is against us, and we have to protect ourselves, and this is a different mentality. And the Christians, we look at them as double majority. They're part of the Christian world, and they're part of the Arab world. But obviously the Christians in the Holy Land are less than 2%. So obviously they are minority within a minority. So there are lots of unique challenges in Jewish-Christian relations. Actually, it's even more complicated based on the history of Jewish-Christian relations, and that's why there's one department in our work that focuses on that. But in all the other peace-building work that we do, and all the work that we do for justice and equality, it's always involved Jews, Christian, Muslim, and other religions if they participate. It's very important that you mentioned that. Thank you very much, just to clarify that.
and I have one other minor comment before I call on the first person in the audience. Regarding your saying the Israeli press is not reliable open source for certain kinds of information. The American press is worse.
I didn't say the Israeli press is not reliable, because none of the media is reliable.
They don't cover it. They don't cover
it. Yeah.
And the American press is worse. I do a news aggregation for the Minarett of Freedom Institute, and I will quote the Israeli press more often than I quote the American press. And not just hot press. I will quote the Times of Israel more often than the New York Times.
But Israelis don't read the Times of Israel. Israelis read the Hebrew newspaper. In the Hebrew and the Israeli television, you really get nothing. So we can compete with that.
All right. Sorry. You had your hand up. Yes. Yeah, and then someone will bring you a microphone.
Sure. Oh, no, not that good. My American name is Jason. It's easier to pronounce rather than Hassan, which is the Arabic name. My question is for whoever would like to answer. Did all the religious establishments reach the age of maturity when it comes to the liturgy of the other and dialogue? Speaking from a personal experience, I think I'm the first Middle Eastern non-Israeli NGO founder that dares to put the Star of David on its logo back in Lebanon. And there was many horrible things that happened because of that. But again, there is that big investment in the ideology of hate. And you feel at a certain point, like myself, having a master's degree in dialogue, that at a certain point, I don't know what to do. We don't know what to do when it turns that some other colleagues on the same table were actually celebrating October 7th. I felt, I'm not Jewish, I'm Druze, but that doesn't count. But I really felt disappointed. I felt helpless. What can I do? I was like, after all these studies, after all these amazing Nakhtai dialogues, are we back to the basics of like we're debating the right of us to coexist? And to be honest, this is why I came here. I drove all the way from Washington, D.C., because what can we do? This is a real challenge, and I found that it's challenging my humanity. It's not challenging my political point of views. Whether you're pro or against or whatever, any topic that you're talking about from right to the left, it's challenging my right to exist as a human being with people who I consider elite and were table colleagues. Can you help in that domain?
I think that saying what has happened, we all need to pause and really rethink the way we are doing things. Right? I think it has been so horrible that we all need to rethink the way we are organizing ourselves and what are our goals. And I'll just say this. As a Christian, it has been very painful for me to see how Christians have responded to both the October 7th and the genocide in Gaza, right? There's been people who have either celebrated one or the other. There's been people who have supported, literally, I've seen groups of American pastors come and sign on bombs that have then gone to kill Gazans. I think that we need to engage with each other, right? But we need to redefine what are we actually working towards. Because I think a lot of interreligious relations, at least from what I hear, in the US, and even to a certain degree in the Holy Land, has been very, cozy and nice and superficial to a certain extent. Because we would come together and we'd eat hummus and we'd talk about how we all pray, and it's very nice, right? And I fast and you fast, amazing. But I think we need to challenge the way we do that, so we address the build relationships, which are extremely important, but also challenge and talk about the hard stuff. Because we didn't, for the most part, we didn't do that. And that's one of the reasons, at least from what I hear, many people have then broken off in their relationships. And finally, I think we all need to understand that we can be both the powerful and the weak, the oppressor and the oppressed in different systems and relationships. And I think it's easy to be in a mentality of us versus them, where we're completely fine and everyone else is wrong. In some systems, Khala is much more powerful and participates in systems that oppress me. On the other hand, as a man, sometimes I'm the one who's much more powerful than Khala. But I think that realization that we're capable of great, great good, but also great, great people, is one first step of this sort of hermeneutics of humility in engaging with one another.
The woman at the center table.
You've given us a lot to think about. My name is Malka Mindy, Be'ivrit, that means queen. I'd like to ask you, the leadership in the different religious communities are really pivotal. The priests, the imams, the rabbis, some of these folks are quite deeply dug into a certain approach to issues. They influence their congregations, the newspapers, the media from that world. And how do you try to bring these people together who have prestige and authority in their worlds, and to get them to talk personally and intimately and try to see the other and how they can work with the other?
I think it's connected to the two issues with the religious leaders. First of all, the dialogue is usually, I mean, at least in Israel, is very artificial. It's very superficial, sorry. They come, they take photos together, they don't really have a conversation. And secondly, what I find is that the religious leadership doesn't have so much impact on the people. It does have in some religious Jewish Orthodox circles, but these people will not participate in the dialogue, but then they're like official rabbis, the chief rabbis, and they don't have a lot of power. The clergy in the Holy Land, maybe it's not new to those who come from Israel, Palestine. The clergy is not leading enough in some places. They're not part of the Palestinian society, and they're very careful because they cannot express themselves freely, because if you depend on the visa of the state or you're not local, so maybe you hesitate to express yourself, so they're very moderate and mild in their reactions. I don't know enough about the Muslim leadership and how powerful it is, but it feels like you have to work more in the grassroots level and less with the religious leaders. And what we can ask them is to say something. I don't expect them to lead the dialogue, but I expect them to follow it. But it's complicated because they keep having this very, very superficial, the very kind of not deep conversation. They don't dare. And at least I would talk about the Jewish Orthodox leadership, because this is the main religious leadership in Israel today. Unfortunately, they're not engaged, and very few are interested in any kind of dialogue. I would say that I grew up in a modern Orthodox, observant family, society, synagogue, and today much of the religious Orthodox observant society in Israel is leaning toward the right and extreme right. And in the last two Rosh Hashanahs, I had difficulties to go New Year when we pray for repentance, and I felt difficult to go to synagogue because I felt that when we do confession, people don't really repent for what's going on. So my expectation of very limited. I did work last year with a group of religious leaders, Jews, Christian, Muslim, Druze, and it was a very interesting experience. It took a lot of time to get to, we did the same exercise we're going to do today, but in 2 days, and still, it's very difficult because they don't allow themselves to open up and to have a proper dialogue. So yeah, they come, they get together, they take pictures, and even that they don't do enough. They don't condemn enough the extremism. Again, at least mainly the Jewish side.
Ann Wilcox, I wonder, Hannah, also if you could just expand your initial statement. It sounded like October 7th was obviously a wake-up call for Israeli society. And do you think they're sort of viewing it as a snapshot and then, okay, things will kind of go back to the way they were before? Or do you think the society, and you're trying to address this, I think, but we'll start looking more in a longer continuum of settlements and the interaction between the communities and, how these problems develop?
I'm the pessimistic in the office. Whenever I get to the office, they all laugh at me because I always come like, I can't take it anymore, and what are we doing here? But I'm very hopeful, and hopeful is not a passive thing like optimism, but it's an act for action and resistance. And I have to say, yes, I'm hopeful. But it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And the fact that I'm here with John, the fact that we are still working at a Muslim center and still involved in building peace and shared society and working to justice and equality, I think it means that the answer is yes, we're hopeful.
All right, this gentleman over here. Yeah.
So I come from a very different background in two ways. First of all, I'm neither Muslim nor a Jew. But I came from India, so I had a great deal of experience with the Muslim people there, but not many Jews. That's one. The other is that I'm from STEM background, science, math, technology, and math and engineering. So I always look at this problem solving requires one prerequisite. What is the problem? Can we agree as to what problem are we trying to solve? And I have not found an answer to this question. Only then we can say, okay, now that we have concurrence on the problem, we can hope to find a solution.
I think that we do need to agree on some basic sort of human tendencies, right, of human rights, of value, of freedom, human rights. Because I don't think everyone will agree on the problem. I think even maybe me and Hannah might disagree on how we define what the problem is, right? But we do agree that both of us need to live in freedom, in security, in human rights, and equality. So again, I might not fully agree with Hannah on what the problem is, but I know that I can work with her because we both want the same thing. And I think that could be at least one helpful step in the right direction, because I don't think we're going to get everyone to agree on how we understand the conflict as the conflict, right? In an Israeli perspective, it's seen as sort of an intractable conflict between two national competing groups. For a Palestinian narrative, it's a settler-colonial conflict, right? You're not necessarily going to get everyone to agree, but we can try and at least work for the same thing, if that makes sense.
Edie at this table.
Thank you for both of you being here. My name is Dana Winner. I've lived half of my adult life in the Middle East. Now, I've noticed that here in the U.S., I've been back to the U.S. about a year, a bit more than a year. I've noticed when we say Middle East that people immediately think Israel, Palestine. You know, it's a much bigger area, right, which you know very well. I've lived mostly in Kuwait, also Saudi, Emirates, Iraq on and off for 6 years, and so on. So I know the region pretty well, and most important, in Kuwait we have a multicultural situation with twice as many non-Kuwaitis as Kuwaitis. My husband is one of the Kuwaiti stateless people. He's a Kuwait police officer at highest rank and a veteran of the resistance against Iraq. So I say this to paint the picture of my experience, which gives context to my question. When you look at the Middle East as a whole, do you see Israel-Palestine as an anomaly, different from what's happening in the region as a whole? Or do you see, as I see, a hell of a lot of oppression and tyranny throughout the region? For example, the stateless people in Kuwait, more than 100,000 people. The Ahwaz, the Shia majority in Bahrain, in the eastern province, and I could go on and on. How about the Armenians in Israel and the Druze in Lebanon? So could you comment on the relationship between the Israel-Palestine situation and the larger Middle East?
Again, it depends how you define the Middle East, but I would say this, at least for Bilad al-Sham, or as in English, someone called the Levant. Okay? What I do see is that there's been a certain structure that has been applied to that area, Bilad Sham or the Levant in English, which has been post-World War I, which is these nation-state sort of countries with very specific borders, which I think at the moment are extremely unstable, right? If you think about Palestine, Israel, Jordan is very unstable, right? Thanks to support of the US, it's still, I think, a country. Syria, we just saw what happened in Syria, very unstable government. Lebanon, extremely unstable government, right? Iraq, right? If I think about those countries, I do see that there is something in common, and that is sort of this nation-state model that has been placed in the area, which I don't think necessarily has proven to be a successful model. That's one. So on one hand, it is. On the other hand, I do think there is something very specific for Palestine and Israel that is different than other areas, and this is the heart of the conflict, right? Where there's, how I understand it, a group was being persecuted and slaughtered in Europe who are seeking a home, and they try to build that home in a place where there's already a people, and that's at the heart, at least, of how I understand it. So it's, on one hand, similar with this sort of nation-state system that is really only holding because of tyrants, and on the other hand, it's also very specific to Palestine and Israel.
Maybe I'll just add that in the comparison actually, I would say, especially when it comes to Christians, there are a lot of statements in Israel. Israelis politicians, they keep saying, oh, the Christian are, the best place for the Christian in the Middle East is Israel. They are the place where they're most kept and protected. And I can challenge that as well, but I always say, well, I don't want to compete with the other neighbors in the Middle East. I want, my standards should be the highest standards and not the standards of maybe tyrannies and countries that are not stable around us. So, yeah, we're in a certain area, but I wish for us to have the standard of what I see in the West in general, in terms of human rights and rights of minorities and equality and things like that.
So as a good Arab, John, I'll ask you if you're related to Yusuf Munir. And Dr. Ahmad, I liked your question, are there Muslims there? And I liked your answer. I think it should be the case, what you're doing. And I question why Jids exists strictly for Jews and Muslims. I know it's in the name, but I think it's high time we expanded the dialogue, because we're just repeating the propaganda that Jews hate Muslims or vice versa, and therefore this is where the dialogue should be. So I hope that you guys will consider expanding. Thank you. And for you, Lady Amirdi, I mean, I'm glad you're compared to the rest of us, yes. I'm glad you're not losing hope, because there is no choice. You will never live in peace. No one will ever live in peace as long as things stay the way they are.
Now the comment over here, please. There are 2 mics out there.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jim Gabriello. I'm an Italian-American Christian. There's been people involved in this for 35 years. Mubarak Awad, the leader of the Palestinian nonviolent movement, believe it or not, in Gaza, in the First Intifada, convinced most of the young Muslim boys and men to put down their rocks. Back then, by the way, there were no suicide bombings. There were virtually no gunfire at all toward even the IDF. Mubarak was awarded by the Israeli government with the illegal deportation to America, and he wasn't allowed to come back until the famous handshake in the White House in 1993. He spoke at my church in 1989, and he convinced me to get involved in this, and also thanks to my old friend Andrea Barron, who helped me create a very successful conference there. So my question is, as someone who's followed this very closely, and I know many of the Palestinian Christian friends, Sandy Awad, etc., Jonathan Katab. In my opinion, particularly after the horrible massacre by Dr. Goldstein in the mosque in Hebron, and followed, by the way, 3 months later by Hamas's first suicide attack in Israel, never happened before. I have seen a terrifying growth and increase of what I call violent, violent extreme religious nationalism in both religions, Judaism and Islam. And I hate to say this, I actually joined the Jewish fraternity in college. It hurts me. Many of my old friends also were Muslims years ago. So it hurts me to see this, but in my opinion, particularly after Gaza, the stranglehold that a small minority of these very violent religious nationalists have on both sides have literally dominated both societies. I want to know if you agree with me with that, and if so, what can be done beyond dialogue? Because I don't think dialogue alone is going to do it.
So just a few things, but first to the Arab auntie. Yes, I'm related to Yusuf Mulayer. He is, if I'm not mistaken, my father's third cousin. I'll connect the question to the Jewish Muslim comment and why I'm a Christian and engaged in this, and connect it also to what you're saying. The reason why, at least, I'm here and we don't have a Muslim colleague is also because the conflict back home falls on the ethnic national lines, not the religious lines. So that's why it's often common to see a Palestinian Israeli, and whatever the Palestinian religion background is, it is what it is. But I understand that here usually it's more of an interreligious, and that's very important. I do think to a certain degree that we have seen these militant national groups, both Jewish and Muslim. But I think the reason, as a Christian, the reason why they have been allowed to grow and foster is because of Christian white nationalism. And this is where my critique would be towards my own, is that whether you are sort of a very conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical Christian Zionist who wants to see a war happen and 2/3 of the Jews die and as many Muslims die is better, right? Those are the ones who have been dictating, to a large extent, policy on Israel-Palestine. So I think first as Christians we need to look at ourselves. And I think this is also the forces behind what is happening here in this country with ICE and some other issues and the fascism that's growing. On the other hand, we also have Christians in the West that are supposedly in the progressive side, but are so deeply motivated by the Holocaust, as they should be, but have then been very selective in who deserves that security and freedom, and therefore have been silent on Palestinian human lives. So I think, and we all know that the only reason why the conflict is continuing the way it is because of America. Yes. America is allowing this to happen, right? It's not like this ceasefire is some plan for the next 10, 20 years. So this is a critique towards sort of my own Christian brothers and sisters.
And I would say it's true that religious nationalism is growing in both society, and again I will speak more about the Israeli Jewish society, but because they offer something that I think that the Israeli society or the secular liberal Israel society could not offer. We haven't developed an Israeli clear, strong identity with values. So Israel was going kind of looking for that, searching for that for the last 80 years. And unfortunately, also we talked about very shallow conversation. We also see in Israel a lot of shallow religiosity. Again, I would speak for the Israelis, but a similar phenomena also with the Muslim community. Very shallow religiosity, which is mixed with nationalism, which is something that gives you meaning. And we fail to offer something else. I would say that the reason why, I mean, it could be very, I hear you saying there's no hope for dialogue, but I would say that when we do dialogue, we try, and we're going to start to exercise it with you in a few minutes. But when we do dialogue, we don't invite the crowd to join. Because we know that people who come are people who are interested and maybe even they're convinced, although it is always more to discuss. We don't want to convince the convinced. We try to find new audiences. We try to attract people to the dialogue. So if it's with all kind of carrots, for example, John mentioned the school program that we work with principals and teachers. So we invite the principal to join the project, to have a dialogue, and at the end we're all going to go to Switzerland together to learn from the dialogue over there. Okay, so they come maybe deciding for the trip to Switzerland, but actually they were there the whole year. They worked really hard with their Palestinian on Palestinian and Jewish partnership. We also have a group institution that asked us to come and help. October 23, it was supposed to be the beginning of the fall semester in Hebrew University. Just this week, today. The semester started in universities in Israel. 2 years ago, they couldn't start in October. They had to postpone it to December. In the Hebrew University, they didn't know how they're going to start the semester because they have at least 20% of students are Palestinian, from the north, from Jerusalem. And they thought, how are we going to have together in the same class, studying literature, studying law, studying science, Israelis that maybe some of them served in the army, some even come to the university with a uniform or with a machine gun or with a weapon, and Palestinians who have family, who suffer with the Palestinian people, who have family in Gaza. How are we going to start the year? So they asked us to come and intervene and suggest to them how to start the year and what to do in order to allow the campus to function. Oh, we had another college for engineering in Jerusalem, that also have an even higher percentage of Palestinian students because they're more serious. They want to study a real profession, not history and literature as I did. And they thought, okay, we don't have problems because in our college they study science, right? They study math and physics. I mean, it shouldn't be an issue. They don't discuss politics. But when the students started to sit together in classes, immediately they noticed there's a lot of tension. And therefore, again, they called us and asked us to run a session so they would be able to work together. The students would be able to sit in the class and study science together. So in that way, I'm saying the dialogue works because then we hear from the students. And one of the professors just reported one of our colleagues and said, you know, after the process we did with them, we see that they do the assignments together. And this is dialogue, because we're talking about the first stage is openness to closeness, or social closeness, ability to be together in the same room. It sounds obvious. Here we have a beautiful group of very diverse background, and you sit together. This is not obvious. Here, yesterday we were speaking in a synagogue in Utah, in Salt Lake City. I was amazed. There were so many Muslims and Christians in the synagogue. I've never seen that in any synagogue in Israel, even the most liberal one. You don't see this kind of thing. So even these small things are quite an achievement. And then, yes, with all the problems, I still think that there is a place for these little steps that leading the society towards something better.
I'll just say really quick, dialogue is not an end, it's a means. Dialogue is not the goal. The goal is to transform our relationship for peace, justice, and equality.
Take action.
And exactly. And dialogue can actually also be harmful.
But you need it. I'm not saying you don't need it.
Yeah. I'm not
You can't just stop there.
Yeah, because dialogue you can either bring people together and manage it really horribly, where they start to literally fight, and then you just make it worse. Or if you don't address the issues of justice and action, you can perpetuate the same systems of oppression. For instance, I wouldn't bring white Christian nationalists to engage with Muslim and Jews in this country, and if we didn't talk about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, it's reinforcing those structures. So we treat it as a tool, as a means, not an end.
But maybe I think we should move toward the exercise, and we will say behind.
We have time.
We have time? Okay.
Yeah.
We need time. Okay.
Hi, I'm Alan Levitt, and I love these sessions, by the way. A couple of things. First of all, our son lives in Qatar now. He lived in Abu Dhabi. We visited him both places. And we never felt that there was any anti-Semitism, although people knew that he was Jewish. So when you talk about the Abraham Accords, it's a real positive thing for me. But anyway, as far as talking here, there's one thing having an intellectual that way, and the other way is how do you communicate with 2 million people in the West Bank or in Gaza that many of whom have horrible PTSD, and it's going to be a multi-generational impact. I mean, is there an internet there? Is there even social media? How do you communicate the things that we're talking about to them? That's one thing. The other thing is, will the people in power in Israel even listen? Will they even open up to this kind of dialogue? And what are we doing in these kinds of sessions that will impact that?
I'll just say about the dialogue with hearing the Palestinian in Gaza and the West Bank. In our work at the Rossing Center, we focus on working with Israelis and Palestinians within the borders of Israel, but every Palestinian has family and relationship with people in Gaza or the West Bank. There is the internet, and that's how we get to know the stories of what's happening in Gaza, because there are no journalists allowed in Gaza, I want to remind you, except for Israeli journalists that are being brought inside by the IDF. So all the things we know about what's happening in Gaza is either through physicians who are serving there or through the internet, through their reporting, and there are many ways to follow that. There are all kinds of initiatives of Israelis who try to hear stories from Gaza and inform other Israelis through the social media. With the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, I think we're in a much basic stage of just hearing them. And even that we don't get to do in Israel. For Israelis, it's so hard to listen to that for Israelis because we're so busy with justifying. Well, why do you complain? It's all because of the Hamas. Oh, but what happened on the 7th of October? We're still stuck on the 7th of October. So whenever we hear the suffering of Palestinians, we keep justifying it, we as a society. I would say that I try to exclude myself and working on that, but we justify that, we deny that. So the first stage is just to be able to listen and recognize. And this is also true for Palestinians in Israel. Just to have Israelis recognizing the suffering, the pain, the connection to the land of Palestinians. So this would be the first stage. So we're not doing the psychological treatment that so many traumatized people need all over, but definitely Gaza. The generations of working on that, it will take generations. But I think we're in the first stage of allowing people to hear and to recognize their pain and suffering. Again, I'm starting from the basic. So that's for the West Bank and for Gaza. For those in Israel, I think since we do work for a common future and shared society, equal, just society, there we can do a more deeper process of building something together, working towards something together. But with the West Bank, I think it's...
Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We're one organization trying to tackle one thing, and there's plenty others doing really, really great work. And trauma will have to be one of the main work that we engage with. About Israeli society and leadership changing, they will not change by themselves. We are trying to work internally to build the movement, but currently with this leadership, there needs to be outside pressure. And it's with this combination of us building an internal movement and an outside movement also putting pressure, we will see the change.
We have a microphone over here. Sorry.
Okay, so you can hear me. So I think it's tremendously interesting that we have a Palestinian Christian with us today, because I think, at least I personally feel that it's great that we can sit here and try to solve problems there, But we're not talking about what is in our manageable interest here as Americans in order to avoid fueling a crisis that is already ongoing. And so I'd be curious to hear from you guys, but also from others in the room, you know, what is it that's in our manageable interest as mostly Americans sitting in this room in order to address, I think, a larger problem that is fueling that crisis, which is our involvement and way that we have chosen to take sides.
And can I ask for Imad also to comment, because we want to get your perspective as well. We want to get your perspective as well. Maybe you should start. We have a Christian, we have a Jew, we have a Muslim. This is Jids, so please, why don't you start?
Look, the question that I think you're asking is related to the, can't be disentangled from the role that the U.S. and other Western powers have played in creating the problem in the first place. Okay? So it's not just, are you fueling the problem? Yes, we are fueling the problem, but it's a problem we created in the first place. And it goes back, even the Zionist movement itself, the modern Zionist movement, political Zionism, was actually planted by the British intelligence. Okay? So, having said that, I want to go back to an earlier question that I think will sidestep. My fellow physical scientist asked, isn't it more important to phrase the question before you can get an answer? And I think that's really, really important. And I think that the question has to be phrased in terms, it has to be framed as a land dispute and not as a religious dispute. It is not fundamentally a religious dispute. Religious issues get drawn into it. They get used as fuel for the fire. But it's not the problem. The core problem is a question of land. And not only the misunderstandings, the falsehoods, the things that are not covered, are all things having to do with that history and that reality. Let's phrase the question that way, and then maybe we can solve the problem. Dialogue has a role. Dialogue's in the middle. First you phrase the question, you have a dialogue to answer the question, and then you go on to action to try to solve the problem. All right? Now, I think...
I would say that it's about everything. I mean, there are many things in the background of this, and religion is part of the problem and part of the solution. But I do find a very important place for religion within the conflict as a cause, as a medium, as part of the result. So I would not agree with you on that, but still we work together toward a place where both of us would be, I mean, both Jews, Christians would be able to live in equal rights and justice in the land. But at least my impression, and of course it's also part of our work, is that religion is also a very important issue. Christian and Muslim live together in the Holy Land. Palestinian Christian and Muslim live together in the Holy Land. I think in Israel, since we're talking about religious nationalism, we see more the religious component also there. We have to deal with all of it, all of it. So it is hard to define the problem.
You can't separate it. Okay.
I was walking in DC probably 10 days ago, and I saw all of these tents. And I was like, what's happening here? And I could slowly hear like evangelical Christian worship. So I'm like interested, so I'm walking around and I see people singing songs on the mall in DC. And I decided to go into the tents just because I'm interested, because I have no idea what's happening. And I just visited the Native American Museum. I'm going to the African American Museum, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna see. And I go in and you see people, you know, with America flags everywhere, with Israel flags everywhere, and people sort of singing and almost on high, and sort of they're high on the Holy Spirit, you know. And, you know, it made me think how Christian white supremacy is thriving at the moment in this country, and is celebrating it. To them, they're this is their time to shine. And what's funny, or not funny, it's kind of sad, that those same groups, A, are anti-Semitic, B, Islamophobic, and C, don't see me as a real Christian because I'm Palestinian. But in so many of our spaces, we don't realize that white Christian Western hegemony is not the main problem here. It's both, it created the conflict, as was mentioned, and it's continuing to fuel it. And until we don't realize it, I think and especially this is the work that you need to do, we won't see as much progress. And I think actually that's why the Jewish-Islamic work is so important. Actually to have sometimes Christians outside gathering in this conversation, I think it's also important.
Why don't we... You want to stop here? Okay, we have 3 minutes left, and I have 2 people who got passed over. But
Well, can people ask?
people who had their hand up like 5 minutes ago.
1 minute.
Andrea and I think,
Can make a 1-minute statement.
Hi, John, this is for John. I wanted to challenge you specifically. I think you could make a huge contribution if you approach some of these white Christian nationalists without calling them white Christian nationalists, but approach the right-wing evangelicals, and the most important thing you need to do is quote from the Bible. Those are the kinds of things that they respond to, not just talking about social justice and so forth. Quotes from the Bible that mean something to you and relate to them as fellow Christians. So there are some other Christian Palestinians that have been active in the United States for many years, but they're not going around quoting verses. That is the key, is quoting the verses. Is that something that Jesus would support? What do you think Jesus meant when he talked about blessed the peacemakers or whatever? And be able to quote the specific verses and where they're from as a Christian. And then you're a Palestinian. And I think that would make an impact, and nobody's doing that right now. There are Christian groups, but they're not doing that. So that's just, I think that would make a huge, huge influence on the conservative Christian groups. And we need your help.
So you don't have to respond. You have like 1 minute or something?
I thought there was one more question, but actually I think it was someone who was trying to help Andrea get recognized.
Everybody wants to hear from Andrea.
Yeah.
But maybe we should go to the next stage.
Go on to the next stage.
And that was a great point.
All right, so do you want to explain the next stage?
Yes. So maybe we'll now open the slides if we haven't yet. So what we're going to do now is explain a little bit of the exercise that we're going to do. So the healing paper methodology is a methodology that's based on dealing with the traumas and finding a way to have a compassionate and real open conversation between participants. And it goes like this. We have one main dilemma, so each person, we're going to sit in groups of 4. Usually we do it with bigger groups, but group of 4. And we have...
There's been a request
to have a toilet break.
Yes.
Okay. Let's take 5 minutes, but no more than 5 minutes. 5 minutes break, grab something to eat if you want to use the restroom, if you want to move a little bit. And when it's 4:30, we're going to get together, but please try to sit with another 3 people around you. So if you sit in the table of 8, so then you will sit 4 and 4. If you're 6 in the table, then 2 people have to join another group. If it will be very difficult, we'll find a solution for those who don't have a group. So the restrooms are down the hall, straight down the stairs. People